Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, professor of Brazilian history and culture at Brown University and the national co-coordinator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. This program is sponsored by the Washington, Brazil office. This is Brazil Unfiltered. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Luis Adams. Luis Adams is a partner of the litigation, arbitration, and compliance practices of Tail and Checker lawyers. In the Brasilia office, he is responsible for matters related to the Superior and Supreme Courts. Adams has extensive tax experience working as counsel for the Federal Treasury at the Ministry of Finance for 24 years, from 1993 until his resignation request in 2017. He worked as Secretary General of Litigation for the Attorney General of Brazil from 2001 to 2002, and as legal counsel and adjunct executive secretary of the Ministry of Planning, Budget, and Management from 2003 to 2006. In 2006, he was named General Counsel of the Ministry of Finance until he was chosen to be Attorney General of Brazil, a position he held from 2009 to 2016. As Attorney General, Adams conducted major cases in the judiciary and was responsible for the coordination of the environmental agreement with the Brazilian government in São Marco Valley and BHP. He is a columnist for the legal website Conjure, having published articles on legal, tax, and constitutional issues every Monday. Well, first, Luis, welcome to Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So I'd like to ask first for your assessment of the first 6 months of the Lula administration. What have been its highlights and its challenges?
Well, the first 6 months of Brazil government, Lula Brazil government, was very challenging, I think. First thing, because the Lula government is very broad in ideological terms. They have 37 ministers and different ideological, political perspective and experience. And because of that, there's some kind of adjustments that have been made between several different agendas. Also, Lula has a very challenged Congress. I think it's the more challenged Congress ever, because there's two ideological positions, the far right and the left, and a very strong center, which doesn't have traditional any ideological, agenda specifically, but is very organized today. And this Congress demands strong against government, the executive branch, to produce support, financial support to budget, to their agenda, and position government itself. And because of that, there's a lot of disputes and challenges. I think the government had two phases, in my point of view. The first one, after Lula established its government, Lula started the international agenda and left the government to go by itself, coordinated by the chief of staff, Costa and Haddad and other ministers. In this phase, there's a lot of difficulties. I don't think the government went well. It was not able to have a straight and adequate discussion of Congress, and because of that, many of their legal legislative initiatives were not approved, and some even was risking the government function, mostly the provisional measure which reorganized government and created all the 37 ministers, almost were not approved. It was approved the last day of its final day of enforcement. So when this happened, Lula came back and started coordinating government itself. And that was very important, because when Lula started with that, things started to go in place. So Lula was able to swiftly approve his appointment from the Supreme Court. It was the highest approval ever to obtain. Lula was able to approve the recent constitutional tax reform. that was very important. It's very important for the government and for Brazil. And now in the Senate, and there's some perspective this can be approved in this semester, this next semester, which is similar because in neither previous government were able to prove any constitutional tax reform as we are doing right now. And Lula started to create a more smooth relation with Congress. And that's what's happening right now. I think Lula is coordinating better its government, its different ministers, assuming his role of leader of not only president, but a leader of the executive branch. And with that, going forward with many different agendas. Not only in economic part, you have also agenda related to social and civil rights part, related to establish Minha Casa Minha Vida, establish the approval, the sustainable policy regarding the Bolsa Família, the family support, distribution of income for people, with that trying to fight the famine and the poverty in Brazil. The reestablishment of economic agenda. We have not only BDS, we have economic growth being more and more visible. You have the inflation control, you have the reduction of the value of the dollar against the real. So I think Lula, when Lula stepped in and started really coordinate government, I think things have started going to place. And this is very, very good. We have a good perspective, my point of view, for the second semester and the rest of the government.
Great. So Lula's first appointment, as you mentioned, for the Supreme Court, Judge Cristiano Zanin, who was Lula's personal attorney and defended him in the Lava Jato, the car wash investigations, he was confirmed by the Senate very significantly, a record number of votes for him.
Yeah.
So at first there was a discussion about whether it was appropriate or not for Lula to approve his personal lawyer. Yet Zanin really got the support of Congress. So how can we understand this? Was it just because Lula was paying attention, or is there something else going on there?
No, I think most because Lula was paying attention. Zanin, there's a strong reaction against this Lava Jato political agenda. Not the Lava Jato itself, not the criminal part itself, but the fact that when Lava Jato start to focus on a political agenda, that happened with the prosecutors and Judge Moro, they started to creating all these, political facts and political actions against many of the people of the political establishment. And this created a very significant resentment against this policy. And Zanin was a guy who fought this policy, this Lava Jato policy. I don't think you can call policy. I can say politics itself, Lava Jato politics, because that's what's happening. They try to organize a new kind of agenda in Brazil against the political establishment. Doesn't matter if they're guilty or not. That's the main problem. So Zanin was very strongly referenced as the guy who fought that, and he was able in this action to re-establish Lula's rights, take him from prison, and obtain for him the ability to run again as a president. And I think that's not only the fact that he's Lula's lawyer, but the fact that he has this reference as a guy, as a lawyer, as someone who was able to dispute these politics made by Lava Jato. He not only support, he gained support from many people of Supreme Court. Gilmar Mendes Just after he was appointed, Jamar Mendes, that the Justice of the Supreme Court, came forward and strongly supported his candidacy for the Supreme Court. And that's, I think, again, a very supporting Congress itself.
So in May, Lula approved a measure to strengthen the access to information law, which was introduced 11 years ago. Can you give our listeners an overview of the law and its importance in Brazil, and what do these new measures entail?
Yeah, the law itself was created to attend to article in our constitution that provide the transparency of government. So I think that the law has many aspects regarding to obtain this transparency for society. And one of the main points is that we call the proactive transparency, in which the government has to take measures to provide total some transparency for its decisions and for its actions in order to be submitted to the society awareness of public policies and policy. There's some exceptions that also the Constitution established regarding security, national security, state security, even present security. And there's some limits about these situations. There's one big exception, and that is something that I think Bolsonaro explored a lot in his term, that is the protection for intimacy, personal intimacy, honor, and privacy. So in that case, and that's a huge exception, because even for national security, the maximum secrecy is 25 years. But when it's related to the privacy, life, people, honor, or people, intimacy, as the Constitution said, that can reach 100 years of secrecy. And that was Bolsonaro used a lot. You know, there's a study from the International Transparency that shows that Bolsonaro established about 1,100, more than 1,000 acts of secrecy regarding these situations. And that's all being reviewed by the Comptroller Office right now. Comptroller Office is the head of this system. He supervised the application of the law and how it being enforced by ministers, etc. We have the final say of any decision regarding secrecy established by any minister, and can review that decision. You know, so
does that decision get reviewed by the Supreme Court if there's a question?
I think so. Yes, it can. There's a possibility to do that, but right now I don't think there's no need for that, because the Comptroller Office will make a full review of all acts.
And although it's a secrecy, we don't really know what were the kinds of things that we think that Bolsonaro was hiding from the public.
Well, one came of a public that was his vaccine certificate. He said he didn't vaccine himself. He put his vaccine certificate under 100 years secrecy. And the Comptroller Office reviewed that and allowed to came publicly. And one thing that's showing, that's under criminal investigation now, that the vaccine certificate was there's a fraud applied to that vaccine certificate.
Was falsified or?
Falsified, yes, because they were able to show that the place where they falsified the doctor signature, because the place where he supposedly made the vaccine was a place in a city in São Paulo, but the doctor was in Mato Grosso do Sul, another state, completely different state. And so that's today under criminal investigation. Who made this this fraud, this falsification of the vaccine. And if even Bolsonaro was a part of this conspiracy.
But why would he do that? If he was announcing to the world he wasn't going to vaccinate himself, did he need to do that to be able to travel internationally? Because I've heard
that's the question. We really don't know why they do that, but still is that because he had some restrictions abroad, United States and Europe, not only to travel but to go around. There's a photo of him eating. He was not able to enter a restaurant, so there's a photo of him eating pizza outside the restaurant because he was not allowed to go inside since he had the vaccine certificate. So,
and if he had gone in, then people would have known that he had in fact been vaccinated, and therefore or if he had been, we don't really know yet. But
he said he was not vaccinated, and that worsened his position because that confirms some kind of fraud in his certificate. He said he was not vaccinated, and he has a certificate with vaccine.
In your view, what are other ways in which Bolsonaro really dealt with transparency or didn't deal with transparency during his term?
Well, the main thing was related to his personal life, or what he says is personal life. So he created secrecy around his sons coming to the palace, the executive palace. He also made secrets about the acting of some bishops of his congregation that was trying to lobby the Minister of Health. And then some suspicion about corruption there. So mostly he created some kind of protection of his acts as a president, and not focusing in really protecting the position, but mostly protecting himself as a person. And that was for political reasons, since he was running for president, but also to protect for any criminal accusation, and that's going to be happening right now. So there's a lot of criminal investigation going on right now surrounding Bolsonaro actions as president.
So also during the Bolsonaro administration, there was the secret budget mechanism that was created, whereas lawmakers could allocate federal funds supposedly for public works, but for their own pet projects in exchange for political support. And in this scheme, the lawmakers didn't need to specify how the money would be spent in their home state. And since in Brazil, members of Congress are not voted by district, but by the state, the number of votes they get in a given state, this was a vehicle for them to kind of get support, to get votes without any transparency. What were the impacts of this scheme, and how is it playing out in the new government?
This system, this so-called secret budget, is a way of Congress to reduce the executive branch influence in the in liberating money for different projects. In the past, the executive had the decision in which budget action should apply the money of taxes they receive. So, with this system that they obtained in Bolsonaro government, the final say is not from the executive branch, but from the president of the House or the president of the Senate. That he had the final say on where and when applied the money was received from the executive branch. And as you said, how the money applied was sustained with some secrecy. The Supreme Court already ruled about that, saying that it cannot be secretive, but there's some past application, modification that still remain secret. And that's the way Bolsonaro obtained the support for not going forward with impeachment against them. There's a lot of impeachment requests in the Senate, in the House. And Bolsonaro obtained the support not going for the impeachment, giving this power to the President of the House. And with that, he was able to establish support in the House, and at the same time, he retained all the impeachment requests not allowed to go forward. This is a huge problem. Lula, when was running for president, was very critical about the system, mostly because, of course, not only because he took power or possibility for the executive branch to decide about the application of money, tax money, but also because created a more strong position for reducing the space of the action from the executive branch, and also for the secrecy itself that didn't allow any kind of supervision on society, how the money and where the money goes. However, the system in place, and it's very difficult for you to review the system because the Congress, the majority of the Congress, is not ideological supporter of Lula. The left in Congress is very reduced, around a little more than around 100 representatives.
So it would be around 20% of the Congress is actually solidly connected to the Lula coalition.
Yeah. So the problem is this, for instance, the recent approval of the tax reform. Lula had to liberate about 7.5 billion reais to pay ongoing expense that came from Bolsonaro time. So that's the political difficulty right now. The executive branch has to relate with a Congress that's not really a supporter of the president, but to gain that support, you have to make a lot of agreements in order to go forward with agenda, and very important agendas, such as the tax, such as social agenda, and so on. So that's the difficulty right now that the president has to deal with. I think that's why some way Lula was, when Lula stepped in, really start to go forward, coordinating his government. That came about last April. He was able to, in fact, to make the government, organize the government, and make the government have a better relation with Congress.
So you talked about the relationship between the executive and the legislative. What's the situation between the Congress and the Supreme Court at this moment?
I think it's more easier. The Supreme Court came. The thing is that the Supreme Court in Bolsonaro term presidency came in force more perspective, more visible, because of the fact that Bolsonaro himself started to attack the Supreme Court directly. So to put Bolsonaro in the front stage and start attacking. That's why the Supreme Court had to react, and react even politically, but had to react. Right now, we don't have the same situation. We have we have a president which the president is more open to dialogue, to discuss. So they are trying to obtain a more smooth relation between all the three branches of government. So the Supreme Court right now is not so in the front stage. The president, the executive branch, and Congress are more in the front stage, as should be. But still, the Supreme Court in Brazil has a lot of power because our country's constitution is very extensive, and everything that supposedly violates the constitution is under Supreme Court scrutiny. And
Right. So that's a good point you're making, because there have been several occasions where the Supreme Court has decided very favorably on certain progressive issues. For example, the decision after Bolsonaro was elected
yeah,
to criminalize homophobia and transphobia. In fact, some even accuse the Supreme Court of trying to legislate. What's your view on this?
I believe the Supreme Court is very strong in supporting the civil rights that are in our Constitution. We have a strong, extensive civil rights regulation based on Article 5 of our Constitution, but also in many parts, for instance, regarding indigenous people, you have Article 221 that's very strongly supported of the Brazilian indigenous people, and the Supreme Court always had to rule about that. And when the Supreme Court established some concrete civil rights regulations, such as Black Brazilian quotas for universities, or the recognition of the civil rights for marriage, homosexual and lesbian and people who in the past have no rights at all in this matter, is mostly going forward in recognizing the strength of our Constitution. And so you have a different perspective between Congress, who try to deal in a politics way, and try to regulate that by law, and the Supreme that really is not regulating, but making the enforcement of the Constitution itself. And I think our Supreme Court is very progressive and very ahead in its time, because we have a very conservative society in Brazil. But despite that, our Supreme Court, and that's important thing, you had members of Supreme Court who were conservative, very conservative. Minister Peluso, who has very strong Catholic beliefs. We had Direito, who was also a very strong Catholic belief. But even so, this justice was supportive with this progressive initiative. I think was in that case, the Supreme Court is using its constitutional space to support agendas that are in accordance, are established in our Constitution, but was not supported by Congress, which side is very conservative.
As you know, in the United States, former President Trump is currently under indictment for several alleged crimes he committed while president, with many more charges likely to come. And the Brazilian Elections Court has ruled that Bolsonaro is ineligible to run for public office until, correct me on the date, I think until what year is he ineligible to run?
He's ineligible for 8 years since 2000. Yes, he can only run for president at 2030.
2030, exactly.
Yeah.
So what, looking forward, what are the chances that Bolsonaro himself might end up being charged for misdeeds he committed during the presidency and actually spending time in prison? Do you think that's a possibility? And if it were so, what would be the kinds of charges that would be leveled against him that might lead to his imprisonment?
I think it's possible, and it's not a certain thing, because the investigation are ongoing. We don't have really any formal charge against him. So far, you have charges being made against people who work with him. For instance, who was his aide when he was president. You have a congressional investigation going forward regarding the January 8th riots. In all these investigations that might lead for he being discharged for many against many accusations. He being charged maybe by his support of the riots. There's some evidence going forward regarding these facts. You have some investigation about fraud against his vaccination certificate. you have investigation going forward regarding his how to apply financial expenditure in his presidency. So the investigation now is going on. It takes some time here. Our criminal procedure, as our civil procedure, is a very long one. It's not as fast as the United States experience. It can take around 5 or 10 years to go forward. So I don't believe that this procedure itself will affect his immediate candidacy for any position. But you have another procedures, electoral procedures going forward regarding his actions as president, because the misuse, our law electoral forbids the misuse of public space and federal space and federal expenditure in elections. And he, in fact, had this misuse a lot. As for instance, the case of when he convened a meeting with the ambassadors of all around the world in Brasilia to accuse what he consider fraud in his election or re-election. And that was considered a misuse of the public space as president in favor of his election. And that's why his force was condemned by the Superior Court electoral court to not be able to run again for 8 years.
And can he appeal that to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, he can, but it's very unlikely he will have any acceptance. He might have a chance to go to this case, go to the one of his appointed minister. Maybe he might have an injunction there. But in fact, that there will be a very strong pressure to not give the injunction. But even if he gives the injunction, that be decided by the whole panel of the court, and he'll lose. In the panel of the court, he'll lose. It's very unlikely because our electoral court has 3 ministers of the Supreme Court as members. So when the electoral court gave a decision, you have a very important expression of the court deciding in favor of the position, and very unlikely the Supreme Court to review this.
Right, or overturn it, right?
Yeah, overturn it.
Yeah. So in that regard, even if Bolsonaro is not eligible to run for public office, whether it's senator, in the House of Representatives, or even for president, if that is really denied him, where is the situation of the far right that supported Bolsonaro and came to power and carried out the policies of the last 4 years? Do you think that there's a possibility? Are they gone? Are they're weakened? Is the traditional center-right likely to gain space, build a coalition between the far right and the center-right? What do you think is the dynamic of politics in the next few years in this regard?
Yeah, that's an important question. That depends a lot how the government of Lula goes. You have 2 years, 3.5 years still for a government. If you have a successful government, I think it's more likely you have a more center-left alliance than a right-left alliance. What Bolsonaro created in Brazil is an organic right. We didn't have that in the past. You have many parties going on and disputing the right perspective, but you never had before a very organic, articulated right and far right structure. And that's happened in Bolsonaro government. And this is still in the present. But the thing, you don't have one party that is able to assume the position. For instance, President Bolsonaro party, PL, Liberal Party. Today is divided. Last week, there's a WhatsApp group with members of Congress who was president of the PL were part of. And there is very strong, very vicious discussion between them. because some of the PL member representatives supported the tax reform, and some were against it. And those who are against it attacked those who supported very, very strongly and very harshly, even accusing of corruption, accusing him. So there's a difficult to organize. One party organized this representative. Right now, you have some politicians that are supposedly being appointed at expression of this right or far right candidates, as Tarcísio of São Paulo. Tarcísio has this duplicity.
But he's you're referring to Tarcísio de Freitas, the governor of São Paulo.
Freitas, yes. And Tarcísio Freitas, for instance, supported the tax reform, was criticized by Bolsonaro because of that, but he supported the tax reform. But at the same time, Lula reviewed and overturned the far right policy for schools, well, they call it civic military schools that Bolsonaro tried to implement in Brazil. Lula reviewed that and overturned this policy will not go forward. But Tarcísio will go forward this policy. That's a far right policy.
So he's basically sometimes carrying out part of the policies of the far right in order to appease that bloc, and also opposing it in order to win over what was
more
called
center,
the center-right people, right? Who are looking for an alternative candidate to Lula and Bolsonaro in the early stages of the elections.
So Tarcísio is trying to strengthen the position. Right now, we don't have any more consistent dispute going on. We don't know if Lula will go forward for re-election. Also, that depends a lot how the government goes. The fact that Biden is going forward for re-election creates some perspective in Brazil that Lula can do the same. But you have many alternatives. In his government itself, one thing about his government, he has almost at the start you have 5 potential candidates for presidency in Brazil. You have Haddad, you have Alckmin, you have Simone Tebet, you have Marina. So you have many potential candidates for president in the next election. But still, you don't have one who is shouting the others. You have all this very have their support and have their structure to support anything for them. The only guy who I think can coordinate and overcome all these potential candidates in itself, but it's not sure yet if he is candidate or not for election.
So actually, it sounds like you're saying that, I mean, if we recall in the past, once in the past, Lula chose his candidate, his successor, Dilma Rousseff, and if he chooses not to run again, or even if he does run again, it seems likely that at some point in the future, whether he wins or not, he would be giving an indication of who he thinks most would be his successor.
And if he has a very successful government with economic growth, with social reform, I think he'll be in a position to appoint his successor, or he himself be re-elected if he wants to. I think that will depend, of course, of his health condition, and many other factors, political factors. But right now, his initial government situation is going very positive, in a way that he's obtaining decision results that other governments were unable to, and he focusing more in a more coordinated and more easy relation with all branch of powers in the government, and a very good relation with the state government itself. Even Tarcísio has had good relation with Lula. I think that's a possible perspective for Lula election if he wants to.
Luis, one final question. You were a student activist in the 70s, really involved in transforming Brazilian policies and politics, participating in the government. What is your personal feelings about Brazil's future? How are you seeing the future? In a good way, in a negative way? What's your attitude?
That's difficult. It's always influenced by the context, you know. Right now, I'm very positive. But one thing we must be sure, be clear, we have a very conservative society. And that society, in some moments, supported a very problematic, a very, I can say, inhuman person as Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro was not only a far right, it was a far right supported agenda that created, for instance, the Yanomami genocide that was discovered this year. He supported the attack of a vaccination policy. That's the tradition. Brazil has a tradition of vaccination. Brazil has capability to vaccinate all its population. And he attacked this policy. In a way, there's 600,000 Brazilians died because of COVID. No, we don't have any event in our history in which 600,000 people in Brazil died for one cause, and that's happened. Of course,
I think actually even the estimates are even maybe 700,000. If I'm not
because
mistaken.
of the falsification of the information that came. So even that was not truthful because the government creates so much secrecy, manipulates so much the information that you had this. We have this our Geographic and Statistical Institute make a decennial study of Brazil's situation. That came forward only this year in Lula government. He never gave Bolsonaro. He repealed all agenda to make any, the statistical information about Brazil's situation and population and so forth. So the thing is, I think that I'm optimistic, but with cautions, more cautions than ever, because the far right agenda still exists, and they might try to regain position in government and still fight for that. And they are not something we can underestimate. We have to be very alert about that.
Luis, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Brazil Unfiltered. It was a really pleasure to interview you.
Thank you. It's very pleasurable to be here again and talk to you. Thank you very much.
So I hope you enjoyed the interview. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.